Hello there one and all, and welcome to yet another Kings of War battle report, and this time my Rhordian army is complete. It's ready for its first 2,000 point game, this time against Ogres. So let's see if they can make a victorious start to life, or unlife as it were. Here we go, you can see the first image from the battle. This is my undead Rhordian army, playing them as Rhordians, but most of the units can double up as something in the undead list as well, should I decide to go that way in the future. First time they've got out there on the table, and it's the push scenario against Ogres. So, as you can see, the terrain, it's fairly even layout. There's a forest in the bottom left, a house up there in the top right, a couple of hills, a couple of areas of difficult terrain, and several obstacles in the form of hedges, one of which is actually underneath one of my units on the near side there, but it's resting on top of them because they're very heavy and they would just fall off. So here we go, I'll go through my list first of all, starting as they appear on the screen here from right to left. So we have my Honour Guard, and by the way, all of these miniatures are very, very tasty. If you want to check out where you can buy any of these, then I'll leave some links in the description, because some of them aren't the most well-known manufacturers. So, the Honour Guard, and there's a horde there. They have Dwarven Ale. There are very few upgrades in this list, very few artifacts, because I really just want to give all the units a try. I want to test out a lot of different things while I'm getting a hang of the army, before I really settle on any particular set list that I want to run with for tournaments and then start tweaking that. I just want to get a feel for everything first. Next to them we have some regular Halfling Knights, which are quite interesting actually. Nimble is their most notable feature. There's just pretty mediocre knights outside of that. And then up there above them we have a horde of Halfling Archers. Behind them we have a Halfling Sorcerer. He doesn't have any upgrades at all, so he's just relying on his Windblast 7 to be useful. Then, as we move along, we have an Iron Beast, which is quite a tasty piece of machinery. In front of that we have two hordes of Dogs of War, which are technically not halflings, so it didn't actually come up in the game, but they will not be inspired by the standard bearer behind them there. It wasn't a factor in this game, I can tell you that now, but I didn't realise that the Halfling Army Standard Bearer doesn't actually inspire anything that isn't technically a Halfling, because apparently Dogs of War are not Halflings. They're the same speed, but they lack the stealthy. And the Standard Bearer, by the way, has the loot of Insatiable Darkness. As we move along, we have a horde of Halfling Spearlings, so these guys are Halflings, but not quite as good as the Dogs of War though. Then we have two troops of Halfling Scouts, and a Duke on Ancient Winged Arrowles behind them. So there are my forces, and on the side of the Ogres, starting on the left, we have a regiment of chariots. I believe these ones have the Potion of the Caterpillar. Then we have a horde of shooters, which are elite, with the blessing of the gods presumably. Then we have a horde of Ogre warriors, and these guys have the Brew of Sharpness, so they're going to be hitting on 2s. And behind them is an army battle standard with the Loot of Insatiable Darkness, so both sides have one of those. We've got two sorcerers at the front, who have some wind blasting and lightning bolting abilities. Behind them we have Grockagamok, and then next to him we have Grockagamok's finest braves, and the chariot captain. So there is the chariot formation in use here, and you'll see when we get to this flank, there's the other regiment of chariots. So that makes them a little bit tastier, and they're out on their own on that flank. So I thought I'd give you a bit of a front view of my units as well, and I'm running this battle report in a slightly different way, not the usual hangout style. I'm doing this through a different broadcast medium, so hopefully they should be higher quality images. Let me know if you have noticed a big difference here. So you can see the front of some of my units. I think I'll do a nice video showcase of the army as well at some point. I still want to add a few more units to it, but it's complete for the purposes of being able to play 2,000 point games. Very, very pointy. If I ever end up in a situation like the popular film franchise Home Alone, then I'll know what I can leave underneath the windows for any would-be burglars to step on. and you can see where I've put my push tokens. We rolled the d3 and we ended up with 3 each, which possibly is going to benefit the halflings because it's not going to slow down many of my units putting a token on them, whereas most of the ogre units are speed 5, above speed 5 should I say, so they'll be dropped to speed 5 with the tokens being put on them. So I've got one on my Iron Beast there, one on a unit of Dogs of War, and the other one on the Spearlings. And I'll tell you why that's kind of a decoy token in a minute. There's the central one, which is a nice big barrel right in the middle of the battlefield. Of course, in this scenario, the aim is to get the tokens into your opponent's half, or just hold them in general, but you get more victory points if you have them in the opponent's half. On the opposition side, there is one on a sorcerer, or a wizard, warlock, whatever they're called in the ogre force. There's one on the army standard bearer, and there's one in the warriors. So, turn 1. And the ogres win the roll-off and elect to go first. So, we'll see what that means, because both sides do have wind blast potential, which means that possibly units could be blasted out of areas where they could score double points in the last turn, should the casters be alive to that point. So maybe going last is a slight benefit on that front, but I'm sure the ogres do want to close the distance on the halflings. It's not much of a halfling gun line, but the halfling's being slow as well. If he can initiate the battle on my half of the table, it's going to be difficult for me to then reach his half, especially with all the difficult terrain and obstacles around. Very rarely are my units going to be able to move out the double, so it's mostly just 4 inches a turn they're going to be moving. And the shooters, in the first turn, what do? Along with a bit of lightning bolt action, well, they get quite a juicy roll onto the Dogs of War and manage to put 9 damage on them, which is not a good start. So I'm going to have to be wary with that unit now. The other unit of Dogs of War were behind cover, but they wouldn't actually get any cover benefits yet. And the Spearlings have stealthy. So the Dogs of War do not have stealthy, but they do have ensnare, which is nice. There is a formation that allows you to give Spearlings ensnare as well, but I haven't tried that here, and we'll be trying that at some stage there. So not very eventful for the ogres turn 1, apart from some damage dished out. So turn 1 for the halflings, and my plan here is becoming evident. So my knights have pushed forward onto the hill into charge range of the chariots on that flank, which I'm quite happy to trade because I've got my honour guard right there, who can then move in and take out those chariots should they attack the knights. So because those knights are nimble, should the chariots fail to kill them, which is a distinct possibility, I would expect them to maybe waver them, because chariot regiments don't have a vast number of attacks. So should they fail to kill them, if it's a waver, then a nimble unit can actually do more than most when they become wavered, of course, because they get the extra pivot, so they could potentially move backwards, pivot round to a jaunty angle, and block a potential multi-charge that could be coming in from backup units onto the honour guard. And should they not even waver them, then of course the knights would be free to just wander off and cause a blockage on anyone else that's coming in. So the honour guard would be pretty much free to take out those chariots. Then the archers haven't moved, of course, because they're going to be shooting at some of the ogres that advanced. I'm going to be targeting the characters, because that's something I've failed to do in the past against ogre lists like this. Left the wizards alive and then they just dish out the pain. So I'm going to be targeting them. You can see there the distance between the knights and those chariots, trying to lure them in. The units of Dogs of War have moved up, along with the standard bearer, who technically can't inspire them, but we weren't really aware of that at this stage. And the 2 troops of scouts have pushed up, so they're just dipping their toe into the woods so that they can shoot out of the woods, and they want to target the units all the way on the other side there. And the Duke, the one possibility here with the Duke, what I could have done, of course, is deploy him all the way out on the left, and then push him forward 20 inches in the first turn him inwards to face the battlefield, and then just cause a threat that way. But I want to use him in the middle, because my plan is to win the centre of the table, and the flanks are really being used to just draw as many enemy units towards them as possible to keep them away from that fight, where I want the bulk of the fighting to take place, where I've got my Iron Beast, I've got my Dogs of War, and I'm going to have my Duke going in there as well. So the 2 units of scouts are really just going to be holding up the chariots, and even the Spearlings carrying that loot. They're kind of a little bit bait. If I can get maybe the Ogre Warriors over there, in that kind of direction, that would be great. Because I want the centre, because there's a lot of tokens there. And what do the archers do here? Well, put 5 damage onto one of the warlocks and waver it. I'm pretty sure they're called warlocks, by the way. If they're not, I'm sure someone will correct me. So that's nice, wavering him. The 2 troops of scouts, what do? Well, just 2 damage onto the shooters, because I would like them to be dead. They're really the only good ranged unit on the ogre side, so I would like them to be gone, very much so. And you can see how it's looking there. Very slow advance from the Rhordians. There's not a lot of speed in this list. The 2 cavalry units are only speed 7. So apart from that, there's only 1 fast unit, which is of course the Duke. Everything else is very, very slow. Turn 2. So the ogre chariots, they decide it's not exactly a subtle piece of bait, but they've taken it regardless. They obviously feel that it's worth it to kill that unit, even at the risk of losing those chariots in return, assuming that they can get some follow-ups with other units, and you'll see what the setup is for that. So first of all, the Berserker Braves are heading in this direction, so they would be something I wouldn't want charging into the Honour Guard. And then you can see the Chariot Captain as well, who, because he's taller than your average ogre, can actually see over them, so he'll to declare multi-charges from that position, despite being right up against them. And the wavered warlock has moved back, and Grokgamok and the other warlock have moved forward slightly. And you can see the warriors and the standard bearer are on the other side of the hill there. And because I've got Wind Blast, that's probably what's inspired him to kind of put units right up against each other behind, so I can't push them back and out of charge range, which is what you have to do when you're up against Wind Blast. Over here, you can see that those chariots are being a bit tentative. They've put themselves within charge range of my scouts, but of course I have the option of just ducking the scouts behind the trees and becoming effectively invisible. So we'll see whether I choose to do that. But they are still providing a threat, and I can't see them with my Duke because I've elected to push him towards the middle. And what do the ogre shooters do this time? And a bit of lightning bolt action. Well, look at that. Another obscene amount of damage dished out onto that central Dogs of War unit, and they are wavered. So what I'm thinking for the future is, do not put Dogs of War necessarily on the front line against shooting, because they're not stealthy like some of the other units, and especially shooting that has piercing, you don't really want that to be shooting at them, because that's the ideal thing to take them down with. You want people having to go into combat with them where the ensnare can take effect. So possibly stretching out the whole army in a long line was not a good idea. I could have possibly moved up some of the units behind others that were stealthy in the front. But that's something that I'll have to learn from as I play more games with this army going forward. And then the chariots into the knights. They do 6 damage, which is a reasonable number. And then they would need kind of an average nerve roll to waver them, but no, roll of a 4, so the knights are going to be fine, which means they're going to be free to charge off the top of the hill at something else and cause a nice blockage with their nimble ability, allowing the Honour Guard to come in and mop up those chariots, hopefully. So there you can see how it looks, and the plan is kind of hit a bit of a snag with those Dogs of War becoming wavered, because I was relying on that hard-hitting centre of the 2 Dogs of War units and the Iron Beast, but like I said, I'll need to learn to protect them more in the future. I've still got the Duke, so we've still got a good chance here. Turn 2 for the Rhordians. So there's how it's looking. The Dogs of War in the middle have just stayed still because they're wavered. The scouts have elected to stay in the woods and do more shooting and face the prospect of being charged by the chariots. They're quite prepared for that to happen. Going to take him a couple of turns to chew through them. The spearlings have moved up just far enough to avoid being flank charged by anything. And the Dogs of War in the centre have moved up into charge range of several units. So he's going to have options to charge units with Grokgamok there, in addition to his chariot, which is nimble also. I've got the Iron Beast behind them. What I'm thinking now, looking at this, is that the Iron Beast could have been in a slightly different position so he can see more towards the right, because he might be needed over there to provide backup. We shall see. So the 2 units of scouts, they put 2 more damage onto the shooters, but that's not going to be enough. The archers, though, they waver another warlock. with another 5 damage, so they're doing well. The shooting's been quite successful from both sides so far. The Honour Guards steam in and do a buttload of damage to the Chariot Regiment and kill them, and then turn around to face the potential threat from that direction. The Knights do 3 damage to the Braves after charging in there, and they're quite happy to sacrifice themselves. They're really just there as an Honour Guard screen. And there you can see how it's looking at the end of that turn. So the Chariots in the top left will have a choice of charging options here. They could charge either one of the 2 units of scouts on the other side of the woods who are still in the woods, because I decided not to dip them back. They could charge into the front of the Spearlings, and the Spearlings with their phalanx, it doesn't actually help you at all against Ogres, because I think everything on the Ogre army here has crushing strength 1, and the Spearlings are only defense 3. So removing the Thunderous Charge from them doesn't really do anything for the Spearlings here. But you can see that the basis of the plan is going to rely on that central Dogs of War unit not dying in the next round, because the big unit that's wavered, the other Dogs of War unit, looks like they're going to get killed by any kind of shooting. Just a couple of wounds on them will finish them off. Turn 3 for the Ogres. So the Chariots decide to go into one of the units of scouts there, which is pretty much what I expected. And I'm fairly happy for that to happen, because it's going to keep them tied up for a minute while I move my units away into where I want to be fighting. And in the centre, Grockagamok and the Warriors charge into the Dogs of War. So I'm hoping that with the Ensnare and Defence 5, they'll actually have a chance here. Because the Warriors, I believe Bane Chant failed to be cast upon them with the Loot of Insatiable Darkness. So I'm hoping they can survive that. It depends how Grockagamok rolls though, because with Ensnare, hopefully he's not going to get that many hits in, hitting on 4s. So I'm fairly confident they can survive that with a nerve of 20 and 22, so they might become wavered, possibly. But even that would be not the worst possible news, because I've got other units around here. I've got the Iron Beast that's eyeing things up. He wouldn't be able to charge into those 2 units in front of him should the Dogs of War die, without them possibly shuffling. But if they don't become wavered, of course, I could then declare a double charge on either one of those units. The Knights are going to undoubtedly be killed by the Braves. They're already on 6 damage, and the Braves have a zillion attacks. And the Chariot Captain uses his Nimble, so we're seeing more Nimble shenanigans here, to work around that combat and go into the Honour Guard to really just block them, to stop them killing the Braves in one go, which they are definitely capable of doing. And some people I've seen put Nimble onto the Honour Guard as an upgrade with an artifact, so that's something I'd look at as well, because they're the definite unit that you don't want blocking off, because they're so potent. And you can see how it's looking there. The Wizards and the Standard Bearer in the middle. So, the one that isn't wavered, the Warlock, tries to Lightning Bolt, or actually he Wind Blasts this Standard Bearer, who we didn't realise at the time did inspire Dogs of War, and he did blast him out of range, so it wouldn't have made a difference anyway though, because he doesn't inspire non-halfling units. Then we have the shooters here, and yep, they finish off the Dogs of War unit that, with the amount of damage they took, should have died last turn really, but it was above average rolls to actually get them to that point in the first place though. The unit of scouts, of course, gets killed by the chariots, who aren't hindered because they have the Potion of the Caterpillar. The chariot character puts 3 damage onto the Honour Guard. And here, the Braves almost managed to double 1 on these knights after putting on a load of damage. That would have actually been very, very good for me, but unfortunately it was a 3, which means they're dead. So they are toast. And that's how it looks afterwards. They overrun, which they overran 5 inches, which was just enough to put them out of sight of the Iron Beast, because if they'd overrun slightly less than that, they would have been exposing their flank to the Iron Beast and almost certainly would have died horribly. So just enough on the overrun there. It was a risk. I believe my opponent was under the impression that the Iron Beast was only speed 4, so he was assuming it wouldn't be in range, but it is in fact speed 5, and they're very fortunate to escape his eye line now. In the middle, so the warriors did almost nothing to the Dogs of War, very few damage at all, but then Grockagamok, despite hitting on 4s now, due to the ensnare, he hit with almost all his attacks. I think he only missed 1, and then he did an entire monkey buttload of damage, and that's going to be death to the Dogs of War. So you can see that it was 15 damage, so they needed 7 on the dice to kill them, 6 because they've got brutal for being ogres. So yeah, with that mammoth damage roll from Grockagamok, they are dead. Wow, wow, wow. So the token is stolen there onto the warriors. So the plan isn't necessarily working, I would say. Still got the Iron Beast, so it's not over yet. If I could kill a unit with him, we'll see how it goes, but it's not looking ideal at this stage. And I'm thinking now, do I abandon the plan of fight in the centre and just concentrate on killing things? With the Duke, for example, he could charge into those chariots there. Do I go for that, or do I just continue with the plan and hope for the best in the middle and try and turn it around? Still got the Honour Guard alive, so there's always a chance. Turn 3 for the Halflings, and the Honour Guard, well, they're a bit of a letdown this time, losing their Thunderous Charge because of being disordered. So they only managed to do 7 damage, which is very disappointing for them. Not a good roll at all compared to the last one they did. The Halfling Archers finish off one of the Warlocks, which is nice. They've done alright for me. The Iron Beast, very disappointing though. Only 2 damage to Grockagamok, just a really, really bad roll. I think he only rolled 1 additional attack, which is usually a bad sign if you've ever used a giant and you only get that 1 extra attack. And then he missed with almost all of them and only managed to do 2 damage to old Grokster, so that's not going to be good. But it's kind of lucky I didn't go into the warriors really, because if he had, then Grockagamok would have had a flank charge on the Iron Beast, which would have been very bad news for him indeed. And the Braves over there on the right can't actually see the Iron Beast now, so he's alright from them as well. And they can see that my Duke has abandoned that flank as planned. He's moved into the middle, so he's going to have options now. Do the Ogres risk the double charge on the Defense 6 Iron Beast? And the Warriors, in doing that, would become hindered as well. So he could definitely survive that, which would leave flanks open on a token-carrying unit for the Duke on Ancient Winged Arrowles to strike. And the Spearlings are just pushing forward because I want to tie up those shooters. I didn't want to turn around and engage with the chariots in a fight in the corner of the battlefield where they're not going to be able to affect anything, because that just frees up the shooters to start gunning down the Duke, which I would rather they didn't. I want them to see the Spearlings as a threat, so we'll see if they fall for that. And here you can see that the troop of Halfling Scouts do not charge into the chariots. That would be nuts. They just move in front of them to block them off and then shoot them, because there's no real point charging them to get rid of their Thunderous Charge, because they would still be wounding on 2s regardless on the Scouts, who are Defense 3. And there's how it looks from that angle. So the Halfling units are dwindling, but the plan, it's been modified and it's still potentially workable. So he does go for 2 double charges here. We've got the Chariot and the Berserkers onto the Honour Guard. So that might not end well for the Honour Guard there. They're a bit unlucky not to kill the Chariot though, and had they done so they could have possibly moved backwards, which I'm not sure would have taken them out of range of the Berserkers, but it's possible. I don't think I checked that at the time because it didn't come up, but it would have been an option, something I would have looked at. And a double charge with Grok and the Warriors into the Iron Beast. So he's hoping he can survive that, since the Warriors are going to be hindered, which would leave the flank exposed of that unit, as I said. And the Chariots, of course, are going to try and finish off those other Scouts, which I expect them to. The Shooters, well, they ignore the Spearlings. They don't take the shooting bait there. They see him as the bigger threat, and rightly so. So he's not getting cover from the unit in front because he's height 4 and they're height 1. So he takes 7 damage. And the Iron Beast goes down in one go. Grockagamok with another mammoth damage roll, and he's just tearing through my army on his own at this stage. Chariots, of course, kill the scouts. And that's how it's looking there. And the Honour Guard go down as well. When the Berserker Braves go into them, there's a chance they were going to kill them, and then the Chariot just kind of tipped them over the edge and did those extra few points of damage to make it a certainty, unfortunately. And it's not looking healthy at all. It's still actually winnable at this stage, but it would take miracle proportions of dice rolling, I think. So, not very healthy at all at this stage for the Halflings. Turn 4, though, for the forces of Rhordia, and we're going to do some shooting to try and thin out the enemy ranks a bit. So, the Archer Horde, they put some more damage onto the Braves, not much, but if I ever get to fight them again, it could help in finishing them off. And Grockagamok had actually left his flank exposed to the Duke slightly. There's just enough space to him to fit in there without it being corner to corner. So, yeah, you've got to be careful when there's flyers around, or nimble units. You've got to make sure you're not leaving gaps when you're turning to face in different directions with other units. There was just enough of a gap in there for him to get in, and I think the Duke is a little bit unlucky not to kill old Grocky here. Got him up to 10 damage, couldn't remove him though. And over there the Spearlings have turned. Their best chance of survival, I decided, was probably to take a front charge from the Chariots and a hindered charge in the flank from the shooters, because that would make it quite difficult for them to do much damage. So it would really be about the Chariots. The other option would have been exposing the flank to both, and the Chariots would have just eaten them, or exposing a rear to one of the units, which wouldn't have ended too well either. So I think this was the best option. And then if they don't die, it's a distinct possibility they could survive a front charge from the Chariots, and the flank from the shooters isn't going to be a guarantee by any means. They don't have the best. They're decent at fighting, but with it being hindered, you never know. So there's how it's looking. Still not all over, but I really needed Grockagamok to die there. Okay, turn 5. I think actually Grockagamok becomes wavered. Let me just check here. Is there a token on him? I think he did become wavered, but there's no token. I'll check that in a second though. So, we have got the Berserkers go into the Archers. They may kill them in one go, because they're pretty tasty. Yeah, I think Grockagamok did become wavered, because he's gone backwards over there with his nimble abilities. And you can see the Chariot has gone in to the Duke instead. And there's a double charge, which was pretty much invited by the Spearlings. I think that's the best they could hope for. So if they survive that, they could potentially get a little bit lucky and take out one of those units on the counter charge. That's the plan, at least. It would slow them down for a bit longer. The Ogre Warriors are just picking up more loot tokens, or push tokens should I say, around the place, and so is the Standard Bearer. And that's how it's looking there. So he's just rounding up all the tokens, making it very, very difficult, because I don't have a lot of units that can actually pick them up now. And a damage is put onto my Standard Bearer, and the Braves do kill off the Archers in one go, with plenty of damage dealt. And they decide to turn to face that way, so they can also see the Duke for next time in case he survives, which he does against the Chariot, but he does become wavered, which is unfortunate. He would have liked to survive there. And the Spearlings go down as well, they take a lot of damage. The Ogre Shooters actually rolled really well in the combat there. I think they would have been hitting on 5s, but it didn't seem to affect them, because of course they've got the Elite as well, which also helps out in combat. So they did quite a bit, and the Spearlings are toast. And that means the token is stolen by the Chariots. So at this stage, it's looking very, very unlikely that the League of Rhordia are going to get anything out of the game, but you've got to keep going and try and plot a way to sneak the scenario, even if it relies on your opponent rolling terribly, which any plan I would come up with at this stage would rely on that. It could still happen. So, turn 5 for the Halflings. The Standard Bearer charges into the Chariot. The Duke moves backwards into the difficult terrain because then people that charge him are all going to be hindered. That's the best he can do while being wavered. And the Sorcerer wind blasts the Braves to the side, which puts them into the front arc of the Duke, so they're not going to be charging him in the flank, so he's got slightly more chance of survival now. That's all I could do really. Turn 6 for the Ogres. So double charge, the Chariot and the Braves into the front of the Duke, and everyone else is just surrounding him. So at this stage I need the Duke to take 0 damage in combat. He needs to then jump over the top of this combat and kill the standard bearer over there on the right, who is carrying loot tokens, then turn round and jump over the combat again and take out one of the other units that's holding loot. Which isn't going to happen because once he's got the loot, he's then going to be slowed down and unable to do that. So it's a very, very long shot at this stage, but I could potentially pick up some tokens and get them into the enemy half. So the Warlock wavers my Sorcerer. The Standard Bearer only becomes wavered as a result of a Grockagamok attack. So Grockagamok, who basically single-handedly took out a unit of Dogs of War, one of the renowned toughest units in the game, an Iron Beast, a Defense 6 monster, but he was only able to waver a Halfling Standard Bearer that was... had it already taken any wounds? It may not have done. Possibly. It might have been on 1 damage. So yeah, he couldn't even kill that. How embarrassing. So, as you can see, mass damage is dished out there and the Duke is dead. I now don't have any units to hold tokens. It was a bit of a long shot to even hold any of them by the end of the game. But I can still do some killing. The Standard Bearer actually has an attack. So if I can survive another turn, then I could potentially kill something with him. You've got to keep going, haven't you? But it's pretty much guaranteed Ogre victory at this stage. He would have to do something very silly like intentionally drop all the tokens. And I can't see anyone doing that unless they had, in a tournament, if they might have some strategic reason for doing that. If they looked at the table and saw an army on one of the top players and looked at the list and thought, I would just get 20-0 by that, I need to intentionally quickly throw this game, then maybe they would do that, but I've never seen it. Okay, so the 2 wavered characters, you can see the Halfling Sorcerer turns his back so he can advance towards the Braves and kind of flashing his Halfling buttocks towards them. Halfling skeletal buttocks, shall we say. So not a lot of flesh on display there. And that is the entire turn. We do get a turn 7. So the Ogres close again, a double charge on the Sorcerer, and the Chariot Regiment and the Standard Bearer charge into the Standard Bearer there. But what do you know, it's a double 1 on the Halfling Army Standard Bearer, so I am going to get a turn 7. I'll take it. I could have done with one of those double 1s earlier in the game, but the Sorcerer dies, so it's just the Standard Bearer left, so I'm not going to get tabled. So in turn 7, the Standard Bearer charges into Grockagamok, but unfortunately his 1 attack does not hit. That would have been the most amazing end to a game, though, if the Halfling Standard Bearer had survived a full-on attack from Grockagamok, had been double 1'd after a double charge from Ogre units, and then killed Grockagamok. That would have been possibly the most amazing game to an end I've ever seen. But no, he couldn't do it. So he does survive the game, though. So there's how it looks at the end. The League of Rhordia do not get tabled, and they can be very, very proud of that. You can see where all the tokens are. There's 1 on that Chariot Regiment, 2 on the Ogre Standard Bearer, 3 or 4 on the Warriors, and that is that. So, first outing for the League of Rhordia, and clearly it didn't go that well, but there were definitely some lessons to be learned there. I learned a lot about the different units, what their strengths are, how not to use them in the future, ideas on what to do with the Dogs of War. Overall, the list is very slow, and I think it was possibly lacking in the shooting department. There was certainly some shooting in there, but I think with a lot of slow units, you want the enemy to be forced to advance towards you. And one way of doing that is with more shooting. I think Dogs of War, I've seen them in the past used a lot to defend the triple Halfling volley gun. but obviously I don't have any of those at the moment, but I am working on it. That'd be something I'll try in the future. I'm also going to try the spearling formation that gives the spearlings ensnare, and possibly having less Dogs of War. I could also try downgrading the Duke to just a regular winged arrowless, which is slightly less potent, but it's cheaper as well, so I could have more units in there. And trying out artifacts on some of the units now as well. I've got a lot of options to play with. Anyone who's a Rhordia fanatic, then let me know if you would like to see anything in particular tried, because I'm willing to give most things a go with this army at the start, as I just get a feel for them. There's a month or two until the first tournament I want to try them out in, so I've got a while to get some practice games in with them, get a feel for all the various units and decide what I want to do there. I'm not sure whether I'll have any volley guns by then. I should definitely have them before the new year, but probably not for the next tournament. So I'm going to have to run with what I've got at the moment and maybe just mess about with what I'm using things as. I'm also making a couple more individual heroes as well, so I'm going to have slightly more options on that front. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it was in slightly more high quality, the pictures, than usual as well, running it slightly differently. You weren't able to see the cursor on the screen because I'm having to run it as a slideshow through this open broadcast software rather than through Google Hangouts, which kind of puts a stranglehold on the image quality I've found. So let me know if you prefer it like this, or whether you prefer seeing the cursor moving around so I can point to things, because I've not figured out a way to combine the best of both worlds yet. If anyone knows how to do that, by the way, then let me know. And let's see, what else is coming up? Well, I'm working on my Goblin Vanguard warband at the moment, Kings of War, because my Kickstarter pledge arrived, and it's including the Whiz on a Liz, as I'm calling it, which is, of course, Cuslow and Madfall, the Goblin Whiz riding on a giant lizard. So you can look forward to seeing that soon. And other than that, I think there's not much more to say. So let me know what you thought. Don't forget to check out the links in the description. Don't forget to throw lots of money at me via Patreon for providing these in-depth, wonderfully tactically deep battle reports that you all enjoy, absorbing all my tactical brilliance from, absorbing it into every pore, and then redispensing it out across your own battlefields in the form of crushing victories over your opponents. With that, all that remains to be said is good night out there, whatever you are.